Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we drift into something that feels simple at first, almost harmless, almost familiar. You probably have it in your kitchen right now without thinking twice. A spoonful in your coffee, a quiet sweetness in your tea, maybe even something sitting in a wrapped package waiting for later when you feel like it. But tonight, you are going to see it differently. Not as a product, not as a habit, but as a force that has been shaping human life for thousands of years in ways you never consciously signed up for. Picture yourself standing in a warm, humid landscape long before cities exist. The air is heavy, insects hum in the distance, and tall grasses sway in slow waves. Among them is a plant that looks ordinary at first glance. You probably would not even notice it if you were rushing through survival. But if you pause, break a stem, and taste the liquid inside, something unexpected happens. A soft, clean sweetness spreads across your tongue, not aggressive, not artificial, just naturally present, like the world briefly offering you a reward for paying attention. You might think this is trivial. It is not, because for early humans, sweetness is rare. Most natural foods are bitter, sour, or neutral. Sweetness signals energy, safety, calories. Your body recognizes it before your mind even understands it. That small moment of taste begins a long chain of human curiosity, migration, and eventually global transformation. A mainstream historical fact is that sugarcane originated in Southeast Asia and was first domesticated thousands of years ago, long before it became a global commodity. But in this moment, you're not thinking in terms of timelines. You're just someone in a pre-urban world, noticing something unusual in a plant and wondering why it feels so rewarding. You take another step through the grass. The ground is soft beneath your feet, uneven, shaped by water and time. There are no roads, no maps, only instinct. You might carry tools made of stone or bone, but nothing that hints at the future economic systems that will eventually revolve around what you're tasting right now. It is strange how something so small can feel so important without explanation. And yet, even in these early moments, human curiosity begins to stretch outward. Why is this plant sweet? Can it be grown near settlements? Can it be carried, stored, shared? These are not yet scientific questions, but they are the seeds of one. Somewhere in early agricultural societies, people begin to notice that certain grasses can be encouraged to grow in controlled environments. That shift alone changes everything. A quirky tidbit often mentioned by historians of food is that early forms of sugarcane were not consumed the way we consume sugar today. Instead, people chewed the raw stalks, extracting juice directly, treating it almost like a temporary burst of energy in the field rather than a cooking ingredient. It is messy, simple, and deeply physical. No refinement, no crystals. Just direct contact between human and plant. You might imagine sitting with early farmers as they experiment with this grass. Some stalks are tougher, some sweeter, some almost disappointing. Over time, patterns emerge. Certain regions produce better cane. Certain soils seem to intensify sweetness. Slowly, without any formal instruction, humans begin selecting, cultivating, and improving what nature offered them. Historians still argue whether this early domestication was driven more by necessity or curiosity. Was it purely about calories and survival? Or did humans instinctively chase sweetness because of neurological reward systems already hardwired into the brain? There is no single answer, only overlapping interpretations that continue to evolve. As you move forward through this landscape, you begin to sense something else. Sweetness is not just a taste, it is a memory device. People remember where they found it. They return to it. They protect it. What begins as a wild grass slowly becomes something closer to a cultivated resource, quietly changing the structure of early human settlement patterns. You walk further and notice small cleared patches in the environment, evidence of early agricultural shaping. Not large fields yet, but intentional spaces where humans have started to influence plant growth. Sugarcane is not yet dominant, but it is no longer fully wild either. It exists in between categories, like many early domesticated plants, suspended between nature and human intention. The air feels warmer now, the sound of insects grows denser. You can almost sense how early societies might have felt this plant as something slightly magical, not supernatural in the modern sense, but still unusual enough to deserve attention, protection, and repetition. A mainstream historical observation is that many early civilizations prioritized crops that could be stored or transported easily. Sugarcane, in its raw form, is not ideal for long-term storage, which makes its early spread even more interesting. It had to be carried as a living plant, replanted, tended. That requirement alone shaped migration patterns and agricultural expansion in subtle but powerful ways. You pause again. Imagine holding a stalk in your hands. The fibers are tough, the juice is sticky. It leaves a faint residue on your fingers. You might not realize it yet, but you are holding the beginning of a global transformation that will eventually reshape economies, empires, and entire continents. And still, at this stage, nothing feels dramatic. There are no ships, no trade empires, no factories, only people, plants, and a slow accumulation of knowledge passed through observation and repetition. Scholars still debate whether early sugarcane cultivation should be seen as a revolutionary breakthrough, or simply an incremental agricultural development that only later gained significance. That uncertainty matters, because it reminds us history rarely announces its turning points in real time. It only recognizes them afterward. As the scene slowly settles, you begin to understand something subtle. The story of sugar does not begin with luxury or addiction. It begins with attention, someone noticing sweetness in a grass, someone choosing to taste again, someone deciding that this plant is worth keeping close. And that is where everything starts. You feel the landscape begin to soften around you. The grasses sway more gently now, as if the world itself is preparing to move forward in time. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, faint but persistent, like a memory that refuses to disappear. You are still standing at the very beginning, where sugar is not yet sugar, but only possibility. You move forward, and the landscape shifts in a way that is almost imperceptible at first. The wild grasses are still there. The humidity still clings to the air, but something new has appeared in the human relationship with this plant. It is no longer only being noticed, it is being shaped. You are now in early river valley civilizations, where agriculture is no longer experimental but foundational. Fields are organized with intention. Irrigation channels cut through soil like quiet lines of logic, and among the familiar grains and legumes that dominate early diets, sugarcane begins to occupy a more deliberate place in human planning. You stand near a settlement that feels alive in every direction. Smoke rises from cooking fires. People move between storage spaces and open work areas. The soundscape is layered with daily survival. And somewhere at the edge of this structured life, sugarcane is being handled differently than before. It is no longer just chewed casually in the field. It is being collected, grouped, and processed with growing curiosity. A mainstream historical fact is that sugarcane cultivation became well established in ancient India, where early farmers developed methods to extract and concentrate its juice. This is where the plant begins its transformation from a raw agricultural product into something closer to what we would recognize as sugar. You follow workers as they cut long stalks and carry them towards simple processing areas. The air smells faintly sweet, mixed with earth and smoke. Large stone or wooden presses are used to crush the cane, releasing a thick juice that flows slowly into containers. It is not refined yet. It is not stable, but it is already changing form. You watch as this liquid is gently heated over open flames. The process is patient and uncertain. No one here is following a modern recipe. They are learning through repetition, observation, and inherited technique. As the liquid reduces, something remarkable begins to happen. It thickens, it darkens, it starts to crystallize along the edges. A quirky tidbit often mentioned in food history discussions is that early sugar production was sometimes viewed as a kind of controlled cooking experiment rather than a defined industry. People were essentially discovering crystallization through repeated boiling and cooling cycles. Long before chemistry could explain why it worked, you crouch beside the process. Heat rises from the fire in slow waves. The bubbling liquid changes sound as it reduces, from a loud rolling boil to a thicker, heavier simmer. Someone stirs carefully, watching the texture shift. There is no industrial precision here, only attention and experience. And yet, even without formal science, the results are undeniable. Sweetness is being intensified, concentrated, made portable in a way that raw cane never was. Historians still argue whether this early refinement process was discovered independently in multiple regions or transmitted gradually through trade and cultural exchange. Some evidence suggests parallel development, while other interpretations emphasize the role of early trade networks linking South Asia with surrounding regions. You notice how this changes everything. Once sugar can be concentrated, it becomes something new. It is no longer tied to the physical stalk. It becomes separable from the plant itself. That separation is subtle but powerful. It allows sweetness to move independently through human systems. As you walk deeper into the settlement, you see storage containers filled with dark, sticky granules or semi-solid masses. They are not yet the bright white crystals of modern sugar. They are irregular, imperfect, but valuable. They can be transported. They can be traded. They can be gifted or reserved. You pass by a household where sugar is being used in food preparation. It is mixed into early desserts, combined with grains, fruits, or dairy-like substances. The taste is no longer accidental, it is intentional. People are beginning to design experiences around sweetness. A mainstream historical observation is that sugar in its early refined forms was often associated with ritual, hospitality, and elite consumption in ancient societies. It was not yet a daily necessity for most people. It was a special substance, used sparingly and meaningfully. You sit for a moment in this imagined household space. The walls are simple, the light is soft, a bowl is placed in front of you containing something sweetened, though not overly so. The taste is subtle but unmistakable. It feels like refinement layered over nature, like human effort compressing something already pleasurable into something more concentrated. You might not realize it yet. But this is where sugar begins to shift from agricultural product to cultural symbol. As you continue moving, you encounter early trade activity. Small groups of merchants exchange goods at informal gathering points. Sugarcane products begin to appear among traded items. They are not the dominant currency, but they are increasingly recognized as valuable. A quirky historical detail is that early sugar products were sometimes transported in dense blocks or hardened forms to make them easier to carry across long distances. These early forms of preserved sweetness would later evolve into more standardized crystal production methods. You observe how careful these exchanges are. Nothing is wasted. Everything is weighed in terms of effort and return. Sugar, even in its early forms, carries a weight beyond its physical mass. It represents labor, knowledge, and time. You hear conversations around you that hint at changing perceptions. Some people speak of sugar as a luxury. Others treat it as a medicinal or strengthening substance. It is not yet universally understood as food in the way we think of it today. Its identity is still fluid. Scholars still debate whether sugar's early value was driven more by taste preference or by perceived health benefits in ancient medicinal systems. In many traditions, sweetness was associated with vitality and balance, which gave sugar a dual role in both diet and healing practices. You step away from the marketplace and into a quieter area near the fields again. Here, The connection between plant and product becomes visible once more. Cane grows in orderly rows, tended with care. It is no longer just a wild grass, it is infrastructure. You notice the rhythm of labour, planting, cutting, crushing, boiling. Each stage depends on the one before it. Nothing stands alone. Sugar is becoming a system, even if no one here would describe it that way. The air feels heavier as the day progresses. Smoke from boiling processes drifts across the fields. Children move between work areas, observing and learning. Knowledge is not written yet, it is embodied, passed through repetition and proximity. A mainstream historical fact is that agricultural societies often developed specialized crops that supported trade expansion, and sugarcane became one of the most important of these in regions where climate conditions allowed its growth. But here, in this moment, it is still just one plant among many, slowly gaining importance through human attention. You pause again. The sweetness that once existed only as a fleeting taste in a wild stalk is now being extended, preserved, and transformed. It is no longer tied to immediacy. It is becoming something that can outlast the moment. And as you stand there, you begin to sense the next transformation approaching, because once sugar becomes tradable, once it becomes portable, once it becomes valuable beyond its field of origin, it will no longer remain contained within its birthplace. It will begin to travel. The settlement behind you continues its rhythm. Fires burn steadily, presses turn, liquid thickens into something more enduring than the plant it came from, and you realize that you're witnessing not just agricultural evolution, but the early architecture of a global story still unfolding. You move again, and this time the air feels different before you even see the change. It is less about soil and riverbanks now, and more about motion, movement between places, movement between people, movement between worlds that are slowly beginning to connect. You are following sugar as it leaves its early agricultural homeland and begins to enter long-distance exchange systems. Nothing here feels fast in the modern sense. Everything is slow, deliberate, and physically demanding. But compared to what came before, sugar's no longer staying still. You find yourself walking beside ancient trade routes, not paved roads, not engineered highways, but paths shaped by repeated footsteps, animal tracks, and seasonal migration. Caravans move through dry stretches of land, carrying goods wrapped in cloth, leather, or woven containers, among spices, textiles, and metals. There is something new being carefully protected, concentrated sweetness. A mainstream historical fact is that sugar began spreading westward from South Asia through early trade networks that connected India, Persia, and eventually the wider Mediterranean world. This movement did not happen in a single moment, but across centuries of gradual cultural exchange. You walk beside traders who treat sugar with a kind of cautious respect. It is not yet an everyday item. It is rare enough to require protection, yet valuable enough to justify the risk of transport. Every journey carries uncertainty, weather, terrain, banditry, political instability, and still, sugar travels. You notice how it is packaged. Dense forms, sometimes hardened or crystallized, sometimes dark and sticky. It is far removed from the original plant now. The stalk is gone. The field is gone. What remains is essence, reduced and stabilized for movement. A quirky tidbit often noted in historical accounts of food trade is that early sugar was sometimes classified alongside spices, not because it tasted similar, but because it shared their economic role as a luxury commodity transported over long distances and consumed in small, valuable quantities. You reach a stopping point along the route, a temporary settlement where traders rest and exchange goods. Fires burn in controlled circles. Camels or pack animals shift quietly in the background. Conversations happen in multiple languages, fragments of meaning passing between cultures. Here, sugar changes hands carefully. It is weighed, inspected, and negotiated over. Its value is not only in taste but in status. To possess it is to demonstrate access to distant networks. Historians still argue whether sugar's early spread was driven more by merchant demand or by elite consumption patterns in emerging urban centres. Some interpretations suggest rulers and wealthy households created the initial demand, while others emphasise the role of merchants introducing new tastes along established routes. You continue along the route in your mind's journey. The landscape shifts gradually into drier, more structured civilizations. You begin to see early urban centres where administration and trade intersect. Here, sugar is no longer just a travelling curiosity. It is becoming embedded in systems of wealth and hierarchy. You enter a city that feels alive with controlled density. Narrow streets, stone structures, markets arranged by category. Goods are no longer simply exchanged. They are categorized, taxed, and regulated. Somewhere within this system, sugar is recorded, stored, and distributed with increasing awareness of its value. A mainstream historical observation is that as sugar entered the Mediterranean world, it was initially treated as an exotic luxury consumed by elites, often used in small quantities due to its rarity and high cost. You observe a household where sugar appears in refined social settings. It is not casually used, it is presented. A small amount is added to food or drink not to dominate flavour, but to signal refinement. Sweetness becomes a marker of sophistication rather than necessity. You sit in this imagined space. The room is quiet, lit by filtered daylight or oil lamps. A small dish is placed carefully on a table. The sweetness is subtle, almost ceremonial. It carries meaning beyond nutrition. It reflects distance, trade, and connection to distant lands. A quirky historical detail is that in some early societies, sugar was occasionally used alongside spices and aromatic substances in medicinal preparations, reinforcing its association with health and vitality rather than everyday consumption. You notice how knowledge about sugar travels alongside the product itself. It is not just the substance that moves, but interpretations of what it means. In one place it is a luxury, in another a remedy, in another a curiosity. You move deeper into urban life, markets expand, merchant districts become more complex, storage systems improve. Sugar is now part of a broader economic ecosystem that includes taxation, regulation, and controlled distribution. You watch as officials record goods passing through gates or ports. Sugar is listed alongside other high-value commodities. Its movement is no longer accidental. It is tracked. Scholars still debate whether early administrative systems accelerated sugar's spread or merely responded to its growing importance in trade economies. Either way, bureaucracy and sweetness begin to intersect in ways that shape long-term distribution. You follow shipments arriving at ports. Ships creak under weight. Dock workers unload carefully wrapped goods. The air smells of salt, wood, and distant lands. Sugar arrives as part of a larger flow of global exchange that is slowly intensifying. A mainstream historical fact is that maritime trade routes played a crucial role in expanding sugar's reach across the Mediterranean and later into Europe, where demand gradually increased among wealthy urban populations. You watch as sugar is stored in controlled environments, sometimes in granaries or merchant warehouses. It is no longer a fragile experiment or a local curiosity. It is becoming a stable commodity with predictable value. You notice something subtle in how people speak about it. There is admiration, but also distance. Sugar is desirable, but not fully integrated into daily life. It still feels slightly foreign, slightly special, slightly out of reach. A quirky tidbit often mentioned in cultural histories is that early descriptions of sugar in Europe sometimes emphasized its medicinal qualities more than its culinary use, reinforcing its role as both luxury and remedy. You pause in a quiet corner of the city, the noise of trade continues around you, but here there is a moment of stillness. You can see how deeply interconnected systems are beginning to form. Agriculture feeds trade, trade feeds cities, cities reshape demand, and sugar moves through all of it like a quiet thread connecting distant lives. Historians still argue whether sugar's transformation into a luxury good was inevitable due to its scarcity or socially constructed through elite preference and cultural symbolism. The answer is not fixed. It shifts depending on perspective. You stand at the edge of this early global network. Sugar is no longer just a plant product. It is now part of identity, economy, and communication between civilizations. And as you look ahead, you sense the next transformation forming, because once something becomes valuable enough to travel across continents, it rarely stays within the control of its original producers. It begins to reshape the world that carries it. You continue forward, and now the world around you feels less like scattered trade routes and more like a structured stage where power, wealth, and taste begin to concentrate. Sugar is no longer just travelling, it is being watched, desired, restricted, and slowly, it is becoming something that defines status across entire societies. You arrive in a landscape where the Mediterranean world dominates exchange. Ports are busy with constant motion. Ships arrive from distant regions carrying textiles, spices, metals, and among them, small, carefully guarded supplies of sugar in its early refined forms. Everything here moves through negotiation and hierarchy. Nothing is casual anymore. You walk through a port city alive with layered sound. Waves strike stone walls. Merchants call out in multiple languages. Workers unload cargo under strict supervision. Sugar is not displayed openly in large quantities. It is handled with care, almost like something fragile despite its physical density. At this stage in history, sugar is no longer an agricultural curiosity. It has become a rare luxury substance. Only those with wealth or political influence can access it regularly. Most people may never taste it in their lifetime, or only encounter it in symbolic amounts during special occasions. A widely documented historical pattern shows that as sugar entered Mediterranean trade systems, it was quickly classified alongside high-value luxury goods rather than everyday food items, largely due to its cost of production and long-distance transport requirements. You follow a merchant into a storage hall. Inside, containers are stacked carefully in organised rows. The air is dry and cool to preserve goods. Sugar sits here like stored potential, waiting to be distributed through controlled channels. It is no longer tied to fields or presses. It is tied to logistics. You notice how attention surrounds it, not excitement, but calculated interest. People do not treat it as a simple ingredient. They treat it as an asset. Some historical accounts suggest that in certain elite households of the time, sugar was presented in small quantities as part of elaborate feasts, often mixed with spices, nuts, or dried fruits to create complex flavour experiences that signalled wealth and refinement. You step into one of these imagined elite dining spaces. The architecture is refined. Light filters through carved openings in stone or plaster. The atmosphere is quiet, controlled, deliberate. Food is not rushed here. It is performed. A small dish is placed before you. The sweetness is subtle, layered into something more complex. It is not overwhelming. It is restrained, almost intellectual in its presence. In this moment, sugar is not just taste, it is symbolism. It says something about access, about distance, about global connection. You might not notice it immediately, but sugar has begun to change meaning. It is no longer just energy or curiosity. It is becoming identity. A lesser known but fascinating detail in food history is that early sugar consumption in elite contexts was sometimes associated with medicinal or ritualized use, reinforcing its status as something both beneficial and extraordinary rather than purely culinary. You move away from the banquet space and into the surrounding urban structure. Streets here are organised but dense. Markets operate under regulation. Certain goods are taxed, recorded, and monitored. Sugar appears in these systems as a valuable commodity, one that must be controlled carefully to maintain economic balance. You observe officials managing trade records. Goods are categorized by value and origin. Sugar is listed among items that require oversight due to its rarity and economic importance. It is not yet a mass product. It is still a controlled privilege. The idea of sweetness begins to separate from simple natural experience. It is now filtered through administration, commerce, and social hierarchy. You walk through residential areas of the city. Wealth is visible in architecture and access to goods in these spaces. Sugar appears more frequently, though still in limited forms. It is used sparingly, often reserved for moments of hospitality or celebration. In contrast, outside these elite environments, most people rely on traditional diets without regular access to concentrated sweetness. The difference is not just culinary, it is social. Some historical interpretations suggest that sugar's association with luxury in the Mediterranean world was reinforced not only by scarcity, but by cultural framing that linked sweetness with refinement and elevated living. You continue toward the coastline again, where ships prepare for long journeys. The sea is restless. Carrying both opportunity and risk, cargo is loaded carefully. Sugar is part of these shipments, sealed and protected. Each voyage carries uncertainty. Storms, political conflict, piracy, and navigation challenges all threaten the flow of goods. And yet sugar continues to move, because demand grows slowly but steadily in wealthier regions. You stand on the dock and watch a ship depart. Its sails catch the wind. The vessel becomes smaller against the horizon, carrying with it not just goods, but cultural transformation. A historical observation often made in trade studies is that luxury commodities like sugar played an important role in strengthening early long-distance trade networks by incentivizing repeated voyages despite high risk and cost. You follow the ship mentally across the water. It arrives in another port, where local merchants distribute its cargo into regional markets. Sugar changes hands again. Each transfer adds value, distance, and meaning. You begin to see a pattern forming. Sugar is not just a product, it is a connector. It links producers, merchants, administrators, and consumers across vast distances, even in its early luxury phase. It is already shaping global interaction. In some accounts of medieval Mediterranean society, sugar was described with fascination, sometimes almost reverence, as an exotic substance that represented distant lands and rare knowledge rather than everyday nourishment. You step into a small apothecary shop in this world. Shelves line the walls, filled with jars of herbs, powders, and preserved substances. Sugar appears here as well, not just as a food item but as a component in remedies and mixtures. The apothecary carefully measures small amounts into blends designed for various ailments. Sweetness here serves a functional role beyond pleasure. It masks bitterness, improves palatability, and is believed in some traditions to contribute to balance and healing. You watch as knowledge is applied in quiet, deliberate motions. There is no industrial scale here, only careful practice passed through generations. Some historians of medicine suggest that sugar's early integration into healing practices helped reinforce its value and legitimacy in societies where it was still rare and expensive. You leave the shop and step back into the city streets. The rhythm of life continues. Markets open and close, goods circulate, sugar remains present but not overwhelming, always slightly elevated above ordinary consumption. And yet beneath this controlled world, something is beginning to shift. Demand is slowly increasing. Trade routes are strengthening. Production knowledge is spreading. Sugar is preparing for its next transformation. one that will move it beyond luxury and into systems far larger than the cities that currently cherish it. You do not see that future yet, but you can feel its direction. The world is starting to learn how to want sweetness at scale. You move forward again, and the atmosphere changes in a way that feels almost like a widening of space itself. The tightly controlled Mediterranean world begins to fade behind you, replaced by a slower but far more consequential expansion. Sugar is no longer only a luxury of elites. It is beginning to enter systems of knowledge, healing, and everyday practice in ways that quietly prepare it for something much larger. You find yourself inside a medieval world of apothecaries, scholars, and early medical traditions. The streets are narrow, often uneven, lined with stone buildings that carry the weight of generations inside these spaces. Knowledge is stored not in databases or books as we know them today, but in manuscripts, oral transmission, and carefully preserved experience. You step into an apothecary shop. The air is dense with layered scents. Dried herbs hang from wooden beams, jars filled with powders, roots, and resins line the shelves. And among them, sugar appears again, but not as a luxury food in the modern sense. It is something else entirely here. It is a tool. A widely recognized historical development in medieval medicine is that sugar became integrated into pharmaceutical preparations, often used to stabilize mixtures, reduce bitterness, and make herbal remedies easier to consume. You watch as an apothecary works slowly at a wooden counter. A mortar and pestle grind ingredients into fine powders. A measured amount of sugar is added, not for indulgence but for function. It smooths harsh flavors. It binds substances. It transforms unpleasant mixtures into something patients can actually tolerate. In this world, sweetness is not just pleasure, it is utility. You might not expect it, but sugar is now part of healing systems. It appears in syrups, tonics, and preserved preparations. It is stored carefully because it remains expensive, but its role is expanding beyond elite dining tables into structured knowledge systems. Some historical accounts suggest that sugar-based syrups were particularly valued in medical practice because they allowed herbal extracts to be preserved for longer periods, extending their usefulness in environments where fresh ingredients were not always available. You move deeper into the intellectual landscape of this period. Manuscripts are copied by hand in quiet rooms. Scholars debate theories of the body, balance, and health. Within these discussions, sweetness is often associated with warmth, energy, and vitality. Sugar becomes symbolically linked to restoration and comfort. At the same time, trade routes continue to expand. Sugar is no longer confined to a few elite cities. It is moving across regions more consistently, carried by merchants who understand its growing demand. What was once rare is slowly becoming familiar to more people, though still far from universal. A lesser known but historically interesting detail is that early sugar was sometimes referred to in different regions with names that emphasized its origin rather than its nature, reflecting how strongly geography shaped its identity during this period. You walk through a marketplace now. It is larger, more structured than earlier ones you have seen. Stalls are organized by type of goods. Textiles in one area, spices in another, metalwork in another, and in carefully controlled sections you find sugar and sugar-based preparations. It is still not cheap, but it is no longer unreachable. You notice how it is sold in small quantities, often measured precisely. People purchase it not for daily consumption, but for specific uses. A celebration, a medicinal preparation, a moment of hospitality that carries meaning beyond nourishment. A mainstream historical observation is that sugar's gradual diffusion into wider society was closely tied to improvements in trade infrastructure and agricultural expansion in tropical cultivation zones. You pause at a stall where sugar is being displayed alongside other imported goods. The merchant handles it with familiarity now, not reverence. This shift is important. It shows that sugar is slowly moving from the category of rare luxury into something closer to a trade staple. But even as it becomes more available, its symbolic value remains strong. It still represents connection to distant lands, complex production systems, and accumulated knowledge across cultures. You move beyond the marketplace into a quieter residential area. Here, daily life is simpler, meals are prepared with available local ingredients, sugar appears only occasionally. Carefully rationed, it is still special, but its meaning is changing in some households. It is used to mark important occasions, in others, it is added to medicinal preparations kept for illness or recovery. It is not yet a universal habit, but the foundation of such a habit is forming. Scholars of economic history often emphasize that sugar's expansion during this period cannot be understood without considering the simultaneous growth of agricultural estates in suitable climates, where production began to increase in scale to meet rising demand. You begin to sense the geographic shift unfolding behind the scenes. Sugar is no longer only being consumed, it is being produced more systematically in regions where climate allows efficient cultivation. This creates a long chain between production zones and consumption centres, stretching across continents. You imagine ships crossing seas, caravans crossing deserts, and goods moving through ports where cultures meet and blend. Sugar is part of this movement, not as a dominant force yet, but as a steadily growing presence. A quirky but often mentioned detail in historical culinary studies is that sugar sometimes appeared in early recipe collections as a finishing ingredient rather than a base component, reflecting its status as something to enhance rather than build entire dishes around. You enter a quiet room where a family gathers. A small amount of sugar is added to food being prepared for a special moment. The act is careful, almost ceremonial. It is not about quantity, it is about meaning. You notice how people react to sweetness, even in small amounts. It carries emotional weight, it signals care, generosity, and occasion. This emotional layer will later become central to sugar's global expansion. You move back into scholarly spaces. Writers and thinkers discuss the properties of substances, trying to understand how the body responds to different elements. Sugar appears in these discussions as something linked to energy and comfort, even if its full physiological impact is not yet understood in modern terms. Some historical interpretations suggest that sugar's association with positive bodily effects in medieval thought helped reinforce its inclusion in both medicinal and culinary practices, blurring the boundary between food and treatment. You step outside again into the broader world. Trade continues to expand. Demand continues to grow, production knowledge slowly spreads into new regions. The system is becoming more interconnected. Sugar is no longer just moving through elite channels. It is beginning to touch broader layers of society, even if unevenly. The structure of access is still hierarchical, but it is loosening, and as you observe all of this, you begin to see the quiet foundation of something larger forming. Sugar is transitioning from rarity to familiarity, from luxury to utility, from symbol to system. The world has not yet realized what this will eventually become, but the path is already set in motion, and you are walking right along its early edge. You move forward again, and the world opens in a way that feels wider, louder, and more physically demanding than before. The controlled apothecaries and medieval marketplaces begin to dissolve behind you, replaced by something far more ambitious and far more consequential. Sugar is no longer simply travelling through trade routes or appearing in medical mixtures. It is now being actively engineered into landscapes. You find yourself standing near vast stretches of cultivated land in tropical regions, where the air is heavy, warm, and saturated with humidity. This is no longer a small-scale agricultural experiment. These are large estates, organised with precision and driven by demand from distant markets. Sugarcane is no longer a background plant, it is the centre of entire economies. You walk along rows of cane that stretch farther than the eye can comfortably track. The plants grow tall and dense, their green surfaces shimmering under harsh sunlight. Workers move between them with practiced rhythm, cutting stalks and bundling them for transport. The sound of blades, carts, and distant processing mills fills the air. A widely documented historical development in economic history is that sugar production expanded dramatically when European demand converged with suitable growing conditions in tropical colonies, transforming sugar from a luxury import into a large-scale agricultural commodity. You notice how different this feels compared to earlier sections of sugar's story. There is no longer quiet experimentation or elite exclusivity. There is scale, there is repetition, there is system. At the edge of the fields, you see early processing structures, mills powered by animals, water, or simple mechanical systems crush cane to extract juice. The liquid flows into containers, thick and pale, carrying the concentrated essence of the plant. From here, it is boiled, reduced, and transformed again into raw sugar products ready for transport. You watch the process carefully. It is physically intense, requiring constant labor and coordination. Nothing here happens casually. Every stage is designed for output. Sugar has become not just a product, but a driving force behind land use and labor organization. Some historical research suggests that the introduction of plantation-style sugar cultivation fundamentally altered land management practices in many tropical regions, replacing diverse ecosystems with highly specialized agricultural environments. You walk through a processing area where heat rises continuously from boiling vats. The air is dense with steam and sweetness. It clings to your skin, almost sticky in sensation. Workers move quickly between stations, managing fire, liquid, and timing with practiced efficiency. You begin to see how deeply structured this system is. Cane must be harvested at precise times, processing must happen quickly to preserve quality. Transport must be coordinated to meet distant demand. Every step depends on the next. A lesser known but important observation in agricultural history is that sugar production introduced one of the earliest forms of highly coordinated agro-industrial cycles, where cultivation and processing were tightly linked in time-sensitive operations. You step away from the mill and observe the surrounding infrastructure. Storage buildings, transport routes, and administrative spaces are all integrated into the landscape. This is not just farming, it is an entire economic architecture built around a single crop. As you move further, the scale becomes even more apparent. Sugar is being loaded onto ships, packed into barrels or hardened forms for long-distance transport. The docks are busy with constant movement. Ships arrive and depart in an ongoing rhythm that connects continents. You watch as cargo is carefully loaded below deck. The sea is unpredictable, but the demand for sugar is steady enough to justify repeated voyages despite risk. This constant movement binds distant regions together in a shared economic system. A mainstream historical fact is that sugar became one of the most important cash crops in colonial economies, shaping trade networks between the Americas, Europe, and Africa through interconnected production and exchange systems. You follow a ship as it leaves the harbour. The sails catch wind, and the vessel slowly disappears into open water. It carries not only goods, but the output of entire labour systems, the result of vast agricultural organisation, and the expectations of consumers thousands of kilometres away. The ocean feels larger now, not empty, but connected. Routes are established, patterns are predictable. Sugar is part of a global rhythm that is becoming increasingly difficult to interrupt. You step into a port city where goods from multiple regions converge. The air is filled with layered scents, salt, wood, tar, spices, and the faint sweetness of processed cane. Warehouses line the waterfront, storing goods awaiting redistribution into regional markets. Here, sugar is no longer rare. It is managed, treated, taxed, It is still valuable, but it has entered a new phase of circulation. It is no longer just a luxury for elites. It is becoming a structured commodity within global trade systems. Some historical interpretations emphasize that the rise of plantation sugar economies marked a turning point in global economic history. Linking agriculture, labor systems, and international trade in unprecedented ways. You walk through the administrative district of the port. Officials record shipments, calculate duties, and regulate distribution. Sugar appears frequently in these records. Its movement is now part of institutional governance. You notice how normalized it has become within economic language. It is listed alongside other major commodities, tracked with precision, and expected as part of regular trade flows. A quirky detail often noted in economic history discussions is that sugar, unlike many earlier luxury goods, developed a dual identity as both a high-value commodity and a widely consumed product, allowing it to transition between elite and mass markets over time. You move inland from the port, entering growing urban centres. These cities are expanding rapidly, fueled by trade wealth and industrial development. Here, sugar begins to shift again in its role. It is no longer only a traded good or plantation output. It is becoming part of daily consumption. You enter a bakery. The air is warm and filled with the smell of baked goods. Sugar is now present in recipes that are more standardized and widely produced. It is no longer reserved only for elites. It is slowly entering broader diets. You observe how recipes evolve. Sweetness is no longer an occasional enhancement. It is becoming a recurring element in food culture. People begin to expect it in certain foods, not just experience it as a rare treat. Scholars of food history often note that the industrial expansion of sugar production directly contributed to changes in dietary habits across urban populations, gradually increasing average sugar consumption over time. You walk through working-class neighborhoods where life is shaped by labor and routine. Here, sugar appears in simpler forms. It is added to tea or coffee, used in inexpensive baked goods, or consumed in small amounts for quick energy. You begin to understand a subtle shift. Sugar is no longer only about status. It is becoming about function. It provides energy, it offers comfort, it fits into the rhythm of industrial life. Some historical studies suggest that sugar played a significant role in sustaining urban labor forces during periods of industrial growth, due to its quick caloric availability and low cost relative to other energy sources. You continue walking through the city. Factories rise in the distance. Smokestacks mark industrial zones. Transport systems move goods efficiently between production sites and consumer markets. Sugar is now deeply embedded in this entire structure. It is present in warehouses, in shops, in homes, and in workplaces. It is no longer distant. It is everywhere. And yet, even as it becomes common, its origins remain distant. It still carries the history of fields, plantations, trade routes, and global exchange systems within it, even if most people no longer think about that background when they consume it. You pause for a moment in the middle of this expanding city. The world feels connected in ways that are both visible and invisible. Sugar is one of the threads binding it together, and as you stand there, you realize something important. Sugar is no longer just shaping economies. It is beginning to shape everyday human rhythm. The world has started to live with sweetness as a constant presence. You move forward again, and the atmosphere changes before the landscape fully reveals itself. Something feels heavier here, not physically but structurally, as if the sweetness you've been following is no longer just transforming economies but beginning to shape human systems at their deepest moral level. The world you enter is built on plantation economies at full intensity. Vast stretches of sugarcane fields extend across tropical regions, organized with geometric precision. The land itself feels redesigned. Natural diversity has been reduced into controlled agricultural uniformity, optimized for one purpose: maximum sugar output. You walk through rows of cane that seem endless. The plants are tall, dense, and swaying in a humid wind that carries both heat and the faint scent of processed sweetness from nearby mills. Workers move in coordinated groups, harvesting, bundling, transporting. The rhythm is relentless, measured not in days but in cycles of production. Historical records indicate that the expansion of sugar plantations in colonial territories fundamentally reshaped land ownership patterns, replacing mixed-use landscapes with large-scale monoculture systems designed for export economies. You notice how little variation exists here. Everything is streamlined. Efficiency is the governing principle. Even the terrain feels adjusted to accommodate production. Channels, roads, and processing centres form a network that exists solely to keep sugar moving. At the centre of this system, mills operate continuously. Large presses crush cane into juice that flows into boiling vats. Fire burns constantly beneath metal containers, and steam rises in thick waves that blur the edges of vision. The air is heavy, sticky, and alive with industrial heat. You stand near one of these processing sites, watching as raw plant matter becomes liquid, and liquid becomes concentrated sweetness once again. But the transformation feels different now. It is no longer experimental or artisanal. It is mechanical repetition at scale. A lesser-known observation in agricultural economic studies suggests that sugar production was among the earliest global industries to integrate tightly controlled supply chains linking cultivation, processing, and long-distance export into a single continuous system. You follow the flow outward from the mill. Barrels and containers are moved toward docks where ships wait. These vessels are larger now, more structured, designed for heavy cargo and long journeys. Sugar is no longer just transported. It is scheduled, calculated, and expected. The docks are crowded with movement. Workers load cargo with practiced efficiency while supervisors track quantities and destinations. The sea beyond feels calm, but the system operating along its edge is anything but calm. It is precise, demanding, and constant. You watch a ship depart. It carries more than goods. It carries the output of entire regions organized around a single crop. The horizon absorbs it slowly, as if swallowing the result of a vast human effort. Some historical analyses emphasize that sugar became a foundational commodity in early global capitalism, linking agricultural production zones with emerging industrial consumer markets in ways that permanently altered global trade dynamics. You move into a nearby port city that exists because of this trade. The streets are dense, functional, and deeply connected to commerce. Warehouses line the waterfront. Merchants negotiate contracts. Administrators manage taxes and shipments. Everything is recorded, measured, and regulated. Sugar appears everywhere in this system, not as something rare, but as something expected. It is still valuable, but its presence is now normalized within economic structures. It moves through official channels with predictable regularity. You notice how language around it has changed. It is no longer spoken of with awe or rarity. It is spoken of in terms of supply, demand, price, and distribution. Some academic interpretations suggest that this normalization of sugar within trade systems marked a turning point where it transitioned from luxury commodity into a structural component of global commerce. You leave the administrative district and enter residential areas. Here, daily life is shaped by the rhythm of labour and limited leisure. Sugar appears in modest ways. It is added to drinks, used in simple baked goods, or consumed in small portions that provide quick energy during long working hours. You begin to see how deeply it has integrated into human routines. It is no longer only a marker of wealth, it is becoming a functional part of survival in increasingly industrialized societies. A lesser-known detail in food history research is that sugar's rising accessibility in urban centres coincided with changes in labour patterns, where quick-calorie foods became more relevant to physically demanding work environments. You walk through narrow streets where small shops sell basic goods. Sugar is displayed alongside tea, grains, and other essentials. It is not extravagant here. It is ordinary, though still meaningful. A small family shop prepares drinks sweetened with measured amounts. The gesture is simple, almost automatic, but it reflects a broader transformation. Sweetness is becoming expected in everyday consumption. You pause and observe people interacting with this substance without special attention. What was once distant and rare is now part of routine life. That shift carries its own kind of significance. Some historians note that sugar's transition into everyday consumption was gradual and uneven, shaped by differences in geography, income, and industrial development across regions. You move toward industrial zones on the edge of the city. Factories rise in structured rows, smoke drifts into the sky. Transportation systems move goods efficiently between production and consumption areas. Sugar is part of this entire cycle now, not as an endpoint, but as a continuous flow. Inside factories, sugar is processed further. Refined into more uniform forms, it becomes easier to measure, distribute, and integrate into mass production systems. Its physical form becomes standardized, which allows it to scale across populations. You begin to understand how deeply embedded it has become. It is not just a product of agriculture anymore. It is a product of interconnected systems: farming, industry, trade, and consumption. A widely discussed perspective in economic history suggests that sugar's industrial scaling played a key role in shaping modern consumer economies by demonstrating how agricultural goods could be transformed into globally distributed standardized commodities. You stand at the edge of this industrial landscape. The sound of machinery is constant, movement is continuous. Sugar flows through it like an invisible current connecting fields, factories, ships, and cities. And beneath it all, something deeper is forming, not just economic transformation, but behavioral change. Humans are beginning to live with sweetness as a regular expectation rather than an occasional luxury. The world is learning to normalize sugar, and that normalization is about to change everything again. You move forward again, and the world shifts from land-bound systems of production into something far more fluid and far more expansive. The boundaries of regions begin to blur. Sugar is no longer simply moving from plantations to ports, or from ports to cities. It is now part of a vast global circulation system powered by wind, water, and human ambition stretched across ocean. You find yourself at a harbour where ships are not just vessels but lifelines of a growing interconnected world. The wooden docks creak under constant pressure. Cargoes stacked in organised formations, each bundle representing long hours of agricultural labour far away, among spices, textiles, metals and ceramics. Sugar is now a regular presence, carefully sealed and transported with increasing efficiency. You watch as a ship is prepared for departure. The hull is massive, reinforced for long voyages. Sailors move in coordinated patterns, checking ropes, adjusting sails, securing cargo. Sugar barrels are lowered into the lower decks where stability and temperature are relatively controlled. The process is routine now, but its implications are enormous. Research in global economic history suggests that the expansion of maritime trade routes during this period allowed sugar to transition from regional commodity to truly global good, embedding it into intercontinental exchange systems. You step aboard in imagination as the ship leaves port. The coastline slowly recedes, replaced by open water stretching in all directions. The sea is both empty and full at the same time, empty of landmarks, but full of invisible routes that ships follow with practiced precision. Inside the ship, the air is tight and humid. Wooden beams creak with movement. Below deck, sugar sits in storage, seemingly inert, yet carrying the weight of entire economies. Every barrel represents coordinated agricultural systems, labour structures, and administrative networks spanning continents. You realise that sugar is no longer just a product being transported. It's now a reason for transport itself. Entire routes exist because of it. A lesser-known observation in maritime economic studies is that high-value commodities like sugar helped stabilise long-distance shipping networks by ensuring that voyages remained economically viable, even when other goods fluctuated in demand. You imagine the ship arriving at a distant port. The environment changes again, different languages, different currencies, different administrative systems, yet sugar remains recognisable. It is weighed, recorded, and redistributed with increasing familiarity. In these receiving ports, sugar begins to enter more layers of society. It is no longer confined to elite tables or medicinal contexts. It's gradually appearing in urban markets, bakeries, and household kitchens in more consistent forms. You walk through a coastal city connected to these trade routes. The streets are busier now, filled with merchants, labourers, and officials. Warehouses dominate the waterfront. Inside them, sugar is stored alongside other imported goods, ready for redistribution into inland regions. Some historical analyses point out that the increasing availability of sugar in port cities played a significant role in reshaping local diets and consumption habits, especially among emerging urban populations. You enter a bakery where heat and sweetness blend in the air. Sugar is now being incorporated into baked goods that are no longer rare or ceremonial. They are becoming part of daily life in certain communities. Bread, pastries, and confections begin to reflect a changing palate. You notice something subtle here. Sugar is no longer only about luxury or medicine. It is becoming about pleasure in a more regular, accessible sense. People begin to expect sweetness in food, not just encounter it occasionally. A quirky detail often mentioned in food culture studies is that early industrial baking practices helped accelerate sugar consumption by embedding it into convenient, portable foods that could be consumed quickly in urban environments. You move away from the bakery and into a growing urban district. The city feels denser now, shaped by trade wealth and expanding populations. Markets operate continuously. Goods are exchanged rapidly. Sugar appears in multiple forms, from raw imports to refined products and prepared foods. You observe how its presence is becoming normalized. It is no longer remarkable to see it. It is expected. At the same time, production systems continue to expand elsewhere. Plantation economies increase output to meet rising demand. Agricultural landscapes are further optimized for efficiency. Sugarcane fields stretch across vast regions, feeding a global appetite that is slowly becoming structural. You begin to see the feedback loop forming. More production leads to more availability. More availability leads to more consumption. More consumption drives further expansion of production systems. Some scholars of economic history describe this period as the beginning of a self-reinforcing global commodity cycle, where sugar played a central role in demonstrating how demand and supply could accelerate each other across continents. You walk through administrative offices where trade data is recorded. Numbers are tracked carefully. Sugar shipments are measured, taxed, and analysed. It's now fully integrated into institutional systems of governance. You notice how predictable it has become in these records. It is no longer an exception. It is a standard category of trade. In inland regions, transport networks carry sugar deeper into societies that previously had limited access to it. Roads, rivers, and canals form distribution pathways. The distance between production and consumption remains large, but it is increasingly bridged by infrastructure. You enter a rural town where sugar is beginning to appear in modest quantities. It is still not universal, but it is no longer unknown. Small amounts are used in tea, preserved foods, or special occasions. A lesser-known observation in social history is that the gradual spread of sugar into rural areas often followed infrastructure development, particularly improved transportation systems that reduced cost and increased availability over time. You sit in a simple household. A drink is prepared with a small amount of sugar. The sweetness is subtle but noticeable. It changes the flavor profile in a way that feels comforting, almost familiar even in its novelty. You realize how quickly human perception adapts. What was once rare becomes normal through repetition and exposure. As you continue through this world, you begin to notice how sugar is influencing not only consumption but expectation. People begin to associate food with sweetness more consistently. It becomes part of taste memory. Some historical interpretations suggest that this period marked a significant shift in global dietary patterns, as sugar began to transition from occasional luxury to regular component in everyday diets across multiple regions. You move through markets again. Sugar is now displayed more openly. It is packaged, measured, and sold in standardized forms. Its physical presentation is becoming more uniform, reflecting its integration into expanding commercial systems. You see merchants discussing price fluctuations, supply routes, and seasonal availability. Sugar is now part of economic planning, not just trade exchange. At the edges of cities, industrial processing continues to expand. Refining techniques improve consistency and scale. Sugar becomes easier to distribute, store, and incorporate into manufactured foods. You begin to understand how deeply this substance is embedding itself into global systems. It is not just moving through them, it is shaping their structure. And as you stand within this expanding network of ships, cities, plantations, and markets, you realize something important. Sugar is no longer simply being carried by the world, it is helping define how the world moves. You move forward again, and the world around you tightens into something sharper, louder, and more mechanical. The age of slow exchange and early globalization begins to give way to structured production systems that feel almost unseparable in their consistency. Sugar is no longer just flowing through trade routes or expanding into everyday diets. It is now being reshaped by machinery, timing, and industrial precision. You arrive in a landscape of early industrial development. The air is different here. It carries smoke, heat, and the constant vibration of engines working without pause. Factories rise in dense clusters, their chimneys marking the sky with steady streams of grey. Rail lines cut across the ground like engineered veins, connecting production zones to cities and ports with mechanical reliability. Inside these industrial spaces, sugar is undergoing another transformation. No longer simply boiled in small batches or processed in plantation mills, it is now being refined at scale. Large metal systems handle crushing, filtering, evaporation, and crystallization with a level of control that earlier centuries could not achieve. A widely recognized development in industrial history is that the mechanization of sugar refining dramatically increased both output and consistency, making refined sugar far more widely available across urban populations than in previous centuries. You step into a factory interior. The noise is overwhelming at first. Machines hum, belts move, gears turn, steam rises in controlled bursts. Sugar is carried through pipes and containers in a continuous flow, moving from raw input to purified output without interruption. Workers monitor gauges and adjust settings. Their role is not to create sugar by hand, but to oversee systems that now perform the transformation. Human labor has shifted from direct production to coordination and maintenance. You notice how the material itself changes through this process. Raw, darker forms of sugar gradually become lighter, more uniform crystals. The variability of earlier centuries disappears. What remains is consistency. Some historical studies in food technology suggest that industrial refining not only increased sugar production, but also fundamentally changed consumer expectations, as people began to associate sugar with standardized appearance and predictable sweetness levels. You move through storage areas where refined sugar is now packaged in sacks, boxes, and containers designed for mass distribution. Labels begin to appear, branding emerges. Sugar is no longer anonymous, it is becoming an identifiable product within commercial systems. Railway stations nearby serve as distribution hubs. Trains arrive with rhythmic precision, loading and unloading goods that move between industrial centres and urban populations. Sugar is part of this constant circulation, integrated into a system that never truly pauses. You stand on a platform as a train passes. The movement is fast, controlled, and efficient. Inside the cargo cars, sugar is stacked in organised units. Each one represents not just agricultural output, but a chain of industrial processing and logistical coordination. A lesser-known observation in industrial economic history is that sugar became one of the key commodities that demonstrated the effectiveness of large-scale supply chains, influencing how other food industries later developed their own production models. You follow this flow into a growing city. Urban environments here are expanding rapidly. Populations are increasing, and demand for affordable, energy-rich food sources is rising alongside them. Sugar begins to appear in more visible, everyday contexts. You enter a small shop where packaged goods are displayed in rows. Sugar is now available in consistent, affordable quantities. It is no longer reserved for elites or special occasions. It is part of ordinary consumption. People purchase it without ceremony. It is added to tea, coffee, baked goods, and prepared foods. It is becoming part of daily rhythm. A widely discussed theme in social and economic history is that industrial sugar production contributed significantly to the rise of affordable, calorie-dense diets in urban populations during periods of rapid industrialization. You walk through residential streets. Life here is shaped by work schedules, factory shifts, and urban density. Food is often quick, efficient, and designed to sustain long hours of labor. Sugar fits naturally into this environment because it provides immediate energy and integrates easily into processed foods. You notice how frequently it appears now. Even when it is not directly visible, it is embedded in recipes, beverages, and preserved products. It is no longer something people seek occasionally. It is something they consume routinely. Some historical interpretations suggest that sugar's increasing presence in industrial diets helped reshape global consumption patterns, gradually increasing average intake levels across multiple populations over time. You move into a bakery again, but this one is different from earlier eras. Production is larger, more standardized, and more consistent. Recipes are measured precisely. Outputs are uniform. Sugar is a key ingredient in a wide range of products designed for the mass consumption. You observe how baking has become both industrial and cultural. Sweetness is expected in many foods that previously would not have contained it. Taste preferences are shifting alongside production capabilities. A quirky detail often noted in culinary history is that the industrialization of baking played a major role in normalizing sugar-rich foods, as convenience and affordability made sweet products more widely accessible across social classes. You continue deeper into the city and notice how sugar is now part of advertising and consumer culture. It is associated with comfort, pleasure, energy, and reward. Its meaning is no longer neutral, it is emotionally loaded. Billboards and product displays emphasize sweetness as a desirable quality. Sugar is not just an ingredient, it is part of how products are presented and understood. You realize that something subtle has changed. Sugar is no longer only shaping economies or diets, it is shaping perception. Some scholars in consumer history argue that industrial food systems, particularly those involving sugar, played a central role in the emergence of modern consumer culture by linking taste, emotion, and mass production. You walk through a factory district again, The scale here is immense. Entire neighborhoods are structured around production cycles. Workers move in and out of shifts. Goods move continuously through systems of processing and distribution. Sugar is everywhere in this environment, but it is often invisible in its final form. It is embedded in processed foods, beverages, and packaged goods that circulate widely. You begin to understand how deeply it has integrated itself into industrial life. It is no longer a distinct substance encountered occasionally. It is part of the background structure of daily consumption. A lesser-known observation in industrial food studies is that sugar became one of the earliest globally standardized food ingredients, allowing manufacturers across different regions to produce consistent taste profiles for expanding consumer markets. You pause near a distribution center where goods are organized for shipment to retail networks. Boxes move along conveyor systems. Workers monitor flow and timing. Sugar is part of nearly every category passing through. The system feels self-sustaining. Production feeds distribution. Distribution feeds consumption. Consumption feeds further production. You step back and observe the scale of it all. Factories, transport systems, retail networks, and consumer habits are all interconnected. Sugar is not just moving through this system, it is helping define its structure. And as you stand in this industrial landscape, you begin to sense a deeper transformation. Sugar has moved from rarity to commodity, from commodity to mass product, and now into something even more embedded. It is becoming part of how modern life is organized. You move forward again, and the industrial rhythm you just witnessed begins to fade into something even more intimate and immediate. The factories are still there in the distance and still humming, still producing, but now you are closer to where their output enters the human body directly. The scale has not disappeared. It has simply become personal. You enter a growing urban world shaped by industrial labor. Streets are busier, denser, and structured around time rather than season. People move according to schedules, shifts, and factory whistles. Life is no longer governed by sunrise and harvest alone. It is governed by repetition, efficiency, and endurance. Sugar is now deeply embedded in this rhythm. You walk into a small kitchen space in a working household. It is simple, functional, and designed for speed. A kettle boils, bread is prepared, a small amount of sugar is added to tea or coffee, not as decoration but as necessity. It is quick energy, something that helps sustain long hours of physical labor. Historical evidence suggests that during early industrialization, sugar became increasingly important in urban diets due to its abilities to provide fast calories at low cost, particularly for working populations engaged in physically demanding labor. You notice how ordinary this has become. There is no ceremony anymore, no rarity, no hesitation. Sugar is part of routine life, like salt or water. It is expected, not admired. You step outside into the street again. Vendors sell inexpensive food items designed for portability. Sweetened baked goods appear in simple forms. They are not luxury items. They are fuel for movement, consumed between shifts or during brief pauses in work. The smell of the city is layered. Smoke from factories, heat from ovens, damp air from crowded streets, and underneath it all, a faint sweetness that is no longer noticeable individually, because it is everywhere at once. You pass workers leaving a factory. Their faces show fatigue, but also habit. Many carry small items of food or drink containing sugar. It is part of how they sustain energy across long hours, not consciously celebrated, simply relied upon. Research in social food history often highlights how industrial diets shifted towards calorie-dense ingredients during periods of rapid urbanization, with sugar playing a central role in that transition due to its affordability and energy density. You enter a small shop selling packaged goods. Shelves are filled with standardized products. Sugar is no longer sold only in raw or loosely processed forms. It appears in refined, Uniform packaging, designed for easy distribution and storage. You notice how predictable it has become. Every unit looks the same, every portion is measurable. This consistency is not accidental. It is the result of industrial refinement and commercial standardization working together. You pick up a package in imagination. It feels ordinary now, almost invisible in its familiarity. Yet behind it lies a long chain of transformation that stretches across continents and centuries. Food historians often point out that the normalization of standardized sugar products marked a key moment in the development of modern packaged food systems, where ingredients became uniform inputs for mass production. You walk deeper into the residential district. Families prepare meals in compact kitchens. Sugar is present in small but regular amounts. It is used in beverages, baking, and simple desserts. It has become part of household expectation rather than occasional indulgence. Children grow up familiar with sweetness as a default taste profile. It is no longer something introduced rarely. It is something learned early, repeated often, and remembered naturally. You begin to notice how deeply sugar has entered sensory memory. It is not just consumed, it is anticipated. Some academic studies in nutrition history suggest that repeated exposure to sugar-rich foods during industrialization contributed to long-term changes in population taste preferences, gradually shifting baseline expectations for sweetness in everyday diets. You move through a marketplace again, but this one feels different from earlier eras. There is less rarity, less exoticism. Goods are standardized, packaged, and distributed efficiently. Sugar is simply one of many available commodities. It is no longer associated with distant lands in the imagination of consumers. It is associated with local shops, local habits, and daily life. You pause at a small stall where beverages are prepared quickly. Sugar is added almost automatically. The motion is practiced, efficient, and unconscious. It is part of routine service. A subtle but important observation in consumer history is that sugar's integration into beverages played a significant role in normalizing frequent consumption, particularly in urban environments where quick-service food culture was expanding. You continue walking and notice how sugar now appears in unexpected places, not just in sweets or drinks, but in processed foods that would not traditionally be associated with sweetness. It is embedded, not always visible. This invisibility is important. It signals a shift from ingredient to infrastructure. Sugar is no longer something you see and choose occasionally. It's something already present in many foods before you decide to consume them. You step into a bakery again, production is larger, faster, and more uniform than ever before. Rows of identical products move through production lines. Sugar is measured precisely, integrated consistently, and used at scale. There is no improvisation here, everything is calibrated. You observe how industrial food systems rely on predictability. Sugar contributes to that predictability by ensuring consistent taste, texture, and preservation across large volumes of production. Food industry analyses often highlight sugar as one of the earliest globally standardized ingredients that enabled repeatable product formulation across different regions and manufacturing systems. You leave the bakery and stand in the street again. The city is alive with movement, noise, and consumption. Sugar is everywhere, but rarely noticed. It has become part of the background structure of modern life, and as you stand there, you begin to sense a quiet contradiction forming. The more present sugar becomes, the less visible it appears. It is no longer something extraordinary, it is something assumed, and that assumption is what will carry it into the next stage of its global story. You move forward again, and the rhythm of the world begins to soften in a strange way. The machinery of production is still running somewhere in the background. The factories still exist. The rail lines still carry their endless flow. But now you're stepping into something more intimate. Sugar is no longer just an industrial output or a household staple. It is becoming emotion, memory, and pleasure at scale. You enter a modern urban environment where life is shaped by convenience and speed. Streets are filled with movement, but much of that movement is guided by routine rather than necessity. People are not just working to survive anymore, they are also consuming in structured moments of pause, and in those pauses, sugar becomes more noticeable again, even if it is everywhere. You walk past cafes and small food shops. The air carries the scent of roasted coffee, baked dough, and sweet syrups. Drinks are prepared quickly with practiced gestures. Sugar is no longer measured with care in small households alone. It is now integrated into standardized recipes designed for consistency across entire chains of production. Food industry research indicates that the expansion of commercial beverage culture played a major role in embedding sugar into daily consumption habits, particularly through drinks that could be purchased and consumed quickly in urban environments. You watch as a worker prepares a drink. The motion is automatic. Syrups are added, liquids mixed, ice shaken. There is no hesitation, no reflection on the ingredient itself. Sugar is simply part of the expected formula that produces a familiar taste experience. You realize something subtle here. Sugar is no longer only about nourishment, it is about repetition of feeling. People return to it not because they need it in a survival sense, but because it delivers a predictable emotional response. You continue walking through the city. Billboards and screens display food imagery constantly. Sweetness is visually implied everywhere. Glossy desserts, chilled drinks, baked goods with caramelized surfaces, even before consumption. Sugar is already present in imagination. Some cultural studies suggest that modern advertising systems helped reshape sugar from a functional ingredient into a symbol of comfort, reward, and emotional relief, particularly in fast-paced urban societies. You enter a supermarket. The space is large, bright, and carefully organized. Rows of packaged foods extend in every direction. Sugar appears in multiple forms, sometimes directly labeled, sometimes hidden within ingredient lists. It is present in products that are not traditionally considered sweet. You begin to notice how deeply it is integrated into the structure of food itself. It is no longer confined to obvious categories like desserts or candies. It appears in sauces, breads, cereals, and processed meals. Its presence is often expected, but not always consciously recognized. A lesser-known observation in food system analysis is that sugar's widespread use in processed foods is partly driven by its multiple functional roles, including preservation, texture modification, and flavor balancing. In addition to sweetness, you move through aisles filled with choices. The variety is overwhelming, yet strangely uniform in composition. Many products share underlying similarities despite surface differences. Sugar acts as a common structural element across them. You pause near a section of beverages. Bottles and cans are arranged in neat rows. Labels emphasize flavor, energy, refreshment. Sugar is part of nearly all of them, sometimes prominently, sometimes subtly integrated. It is no longer just an ingredient. It is an expectation of taste. You pick up a bottle in imagination. The surface is cold, smooth, standardized. The liquid inside carries a familiar sweetness that has been engineered for consistency. This consistency is important. It ensures that no matter where you are in the world, the experience remains similar. Global food production studies often highlight sugar as a key factor in enabling standardized taste profiles across international markets, allowing products to maintain identical sensory experiences in different cultural contexts. You leave the supermarket and step back into the city. Life continues in cycles of work, consumption, rest, and repetition. Sugar is woven into all of these cycles in different forms. It appears in morning drinks, midday snacks, evening desserts, and late-night conveniences. You begin to notice how natural it feels to encounter it repeatedly. It no longer stands out as an event. It blends into routine. You walk past office buildings where people take short breaks. Vending machines offer quick access to beverages and snacks. Sugar is part of this convenience economy. It provides immediate energy and immediate satisfaction, fitting neatly into fragmented schedules. Some sociological studies of modern labour environments suggest that quick access sugar consumption is closely linked to time compression in urban life, where short breaks encourage fast energy intake rather than prolonged meals. You sit for a moment in a public space around you. People are engaged in small acts of consumption, a drink here, a snack there. Sugar is not discussed, it is assumed. Its presence is so common that it rarely becomes a topic of conversation, and yet, beneath this normality, there is a deeper transformation. Sugar has moved from external commodity to internalized habit. You continue through the city into residential neighborhoods. Homes are quieter here. Kitchens are smaller but efficient. Food preparation often involves pre-packaged ingredients. Sugar is already embedded in many of them before cooking begins. You observe how cooking has changed. It is less about transformation from raw ingredients and more about assembly of prepared components. Sugar is part of that pre-structured system. Food history research often notes that the rise of processed and semi-prepared foods significantly increased indirect sugar consumption, as it became embedded in ingredients rather than added manually. You enter a home where a simple meal is being prepared. There is a rhythm to it, efficient and familiar. Sugar appears in small quantities, not as focus, but as background support for flavour and preservation. You notice how little attention it receives. It is no longer remarkable, it is simply there. You move into the evening atmosphere of the city. Lights reflect off glass surfaces. People move more slowly now. The pace of consumption shifts from functional to comforting. Sugar appears again, but now in a different emotional context. Desserts, snacks, drinks shared in social settings. It becomes part of relaxation, reward, and unwinding after long hours of structured activity. Some cultural analyses suggest that modern sugar consumption is strongly linked to emotional regulation behaviours, where sweetness is associated with comfort, reward, and recovery from stress. You sit in a small cafe as the day slows. A sweet item is placed in front of you. It is simple but carefully prepared. The taste is familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. It feels less like discovery and more like return. You realize that sugar has become something cyclical in human life. It is not only part of history anymore, it is part of rhythm. It appears in moments of fatigue, celebration, routine, and pause. You look around and see others experiencing similar moments. Quiet consumption, brief relief, small pleasures embedded into daily structure. And somewhere in this quiet realization, you understand something important. Sugar is no longer just shaping systems from the outside. It is now shaping experience from within. You move forward again, and the atmosphere shifts into something sharper, more coordinated, and more globally synchronized. The city around you still exists, still hums with everyday life. But now sugar is no longer just part of comfort, routine, or consumption. It begins to reveal its second identity, one tied to instability, control, and strategic importance in moments of global crisis. You enter a world shaped by conflict and uncertainty, not a single battlefield, but a network of global tensions that influence trade, production, and distribution. Supply chains that once felt stable now require planning, rationing, and prioritization. Sugar, so familiar in daily life, becomes something governments and institutions actively manage. You walk through administrative spaces where resources are recorded and allocated. Lists are compiled, shipments are redirected, consumption patterns are monitored. Sugar appears repeatedly in these records, not as a luxury, but as a controlled essential commodity whose flow must be maintained even under pressure. Economic history studies often highlight that during major global conflicts, food commodities like sugar became strategically important due to their role in sustaining civilian populations and maintaining industrial morale. You step into a household during such a period. The environment feels restrained. Consumption is measured more carefully. Sugar is still present, but used sparingly. A small amount in tea or preserved foods carries more weight than it once did. Its absence would be noticed immediately. You begin to see how quickly perception changes under constraint. What was once abundant becomes meaningful again when limited. You move into distribution centers where goods are carefully sorted. There is a sense of urgency, but also structure. Sugar is allocated according to systems designed to maintain fairness and stability. It is no longer simply bought and sold freely. It is managed. Some historical records indicate that during periods of global disruption, sugar distribution systems were among the most closely regulated food supply chains due to its widespread consumption and psychological importance in maintaining everyday normalcy. You observe how deeply embedded sugar has become in daily expectation. Even in constrained conditions, people still anticipate it. It is not just a food item anymore. It is part of emotional continuity. You walk through a city adjusting to these conditions. Shops display limited quantities of goods. People queue with patience. Conversations revolve around availability, substitution, and adaptation. Sugar remains present, but its presence feels different, more deliberate, more aware. You notice how even small amounts carry emotional significance: a sweet drink, a preserved dessert. A familiar taste becomes a reminder of normal life amid disruption. A lesser-known observation in social history is that scarcity often amplifies the emotional and symbolic value of sugar, reinforcing its association with comfort and stability during uncertain times. You move toward industrial production zones again. Factories continue operating, though under adjusted priorities. Efficiency remains important, but now distribution goals are just as critical. Sugar production is maintained not only for commerce but for societal continuity. You see workers managing systems that feel more regulated than before. Output is tracked carefully. Storage is monitored. Transportation is coordinated with precision. Sugar is part of essential infrastructure now, not just economic output. You follow shipments leaving production areas. Transport routes are protected and prioritized. Sugar moves through systems designed to maintain flow despite external disruptions. Some academic perspectives suggest that sugar's role as a high-demand commodity made it a key focus in the development of early modern supply chain resilience strategies. You continue into a post-crisis urban environment where recovery and normalization begin to take shape. Stores reopen more fully. Supply becomes more consistent again. Sugar returns to broader availability. But the memory of restriction remains embedded in collective behavior. You notice how people consume it now with subtle awareness. There is appreciation, but also recognition of its previous scarcity. It is no longer taken entirely for granted. You enter a cafe where daily life resumes its familiar rhythm. Drinks are prepared. Conversations resume. Routines stabilize. Sugar is once again part of everyday consumption, but its meaning feels slightly more layered than before. You realize it has now lived through multiple identities: luxury, medicine, commodity, industrial input, emotional comfort, controlled resource. Each phase still exists beneath the surface of the present moment. Cultural studies of consumption often emphasize that food items with long historical trajectories tend to accumulate layered meanings, and sugar is one of the clearest examples of this cumulative symbolic evolution. You walk through a marketplace where global products are once again widely available. Sugar appears in many forms, from raw ingredients to highly processed goods. Its global distribution network has recovered and expanded further. You notice how interconnected everything remains: production regions, transportation systems, retail networks, and consumers form a continuous loop. Sugar flows through all of it, adapting to conditions while maintaining constant demand. You pause near a display of packaged foods. Ingredients are listed in detail. Sugar appears in many of them, sometimes under different names or forms. It is no longer always immediately recognizable, but it remains structurally present. A widely discussed theme in modern food science is that sugar has become one of the most functionally versatile ingredients in processed foods, contributing not only sweetness but also texture, preservation, and stability. You move into residential life again. People cook, eat, and share meals in environments shaped by convenience and global supply. Sugar is present in kitchens in multiple forms, from basic granules to integrated ingredients. You notice how deeply normalized it has become. It is part of expectation rather than decision in many cases. Its presence is assumed in certain foods without conscious thought. You sit quietly in a home environment. A simple meal is shared. Sweetness appears in subtle ways, integrated into the overall experience of food rather than standing apart from it. You begin to understand how fully sugar has embedded itself into human routine. It is no longer just something added. It is something built into systems of production, distribution, and consumption that define modern life. Some sociological interpretations suggest that sugar's normalization reflects broader changes in industrial food systems, where convenience, consistency, and emotional satisfaction became central design principles. You move outside again into evening city life. Lights reflect on streets. People move between work and rest. Sugar appears in small personal moments. Snacks, drinks, shared desserts. It is part of winding down, part of transition between activity and rest. You notice how it has become emotionally integrated into daily cycles. It marks pauses, rewards, and small recoveries throughout the day. A subtle observation in behavioral nutrition studies is that sugar consumption often aligns with emotional and cognitive transitions in modern life, reinforcing its association with relief and satisfaction. You stand in a quiet space as the day slows. The world feels balanced again after periods of disruption. Sugar continues its presence, less visible than before, but more deeply embedded than ever. It is no longer just a commodity moving through systems. It is something that helps those systems feel stable to the people living within them. And that realization carries you forward into the next layer of its story. You move forward again, and the world becomes quieter in appearance but far more intense beneath the surface. The noise of factories and crowded cities fades slightly, replaced by controlled environments of research, measurement, and analysis. Sugar is no longer only being consumed or distributed, it is now being examined. You enter a laboratory setting. The air is clean, structured, almost sterile compared to the environments you have moved through before. Glass instruments, measuring tools, and controlled experiments define the space. Here, sugar is not just a substance of trade or taste, it is a subject of scientific curiosity. You observe researchers dissolving sugar into liquids, measuring reactions, observing how it behaves under different conditions. Temperature, concentration, and chemical interaction become part of the story. The focus is no longer on where sugar comes from, but on how it behaves inside the human body. Economic historians note that as sugar became more widely available in industrial societies, scientific interest in its physiological effects increased significantly, particularly in relation to energy, metabolism, and dietary health. You watch as discussions unfold between researchers. They are not debating whether sugar exists or whether it is useful. That stage of history has long passed. Instead, they are trying to understand its role in human biology, how quickly it is absorbed, how it affects energy levels, how it interacts with daily dietary patterns. You begin to see sugar in a different frame now, not as a commodity, not as a symbol, but as a biochemical presence moving through human systems. You leave the laboratory and step into a hospital environment. The atmosphere is calm but precise. Medical professionals move through corridors with focused attention. Diet is becoming part of medical consideration in more structured ways. Sugar appears in nutritional discussions, patient care plans, and dietary recommendations. Clinical nutrition studies suggest that the increasing prevalence of sugar in modern diets led to growing attention within medical communities regarding its long-term effects on energy regulation and metabolic health. You notice how language around sugar begins to shift here. It is no longer purely positive or purely functional. It is being evaluated, balanced, measured. Its role is being reconsidered within the context of long-term well-being. You move into everyday life again. But now with this scientific awareness lingering in the background, people continue to consume sugar regularly. But discussions around it have become more frequent. Not always critical, but more conscious. You hear conversations in cafes and homes. Some people talk about energy, some about habits, some about moderation. Sugar is no longer invisible in thought. It is something people are increasingly aware of as part of their daily choices. Anthropological research into modern food cultures indicates that increased awareness of dietary components like sugar often emerges alongside higher availability of processed foods and greater nutritional information access. You walk through a supermarket again, this time. Your attention is drawn not just to the presence of sugar, but to how it is labelled. Ingredient lists are longer. Product variations are more complex. Sugar appears under multiple forms and names, integrated into a wide range of items. You begin to notice how deeply it has embedded itself into processed food systems. It's not always obvious at first glance. It is dispersed, fragmented, distributed across many categories of consumption. Some food system analyses highlight that sugar's widespread use in processed products is partly due to its multifunctional properties, including flavor enhancement, preservation, and texture modification. You move through aisles filled with products designed for convenience. Ready meals, packaged snacks, beverages. Sugar is present across them in varying degrees, sometimes prominent, sometimes hidden, but consistently present. You pause and realize how much of modern food structure depends on ingredients like this, not just for taste, but for stability and design. You step outside into a public space where people are moving through their daily routines. The city feels normal, but layered with invisible systems of production and consumption. Sugar is part of those systems, integrated so deeply that it rarely requires attention. You notice how it appears in small moments: a drink during a break, a snack between tasks, a dessert shared casually. It is no longer tied to status or rarity. It is tied to rhythm. Behavioral nutrition studies suggest that sugar consumption in modern societies is often linked to habitual patterns embedded in daily routines, rather than isolated dietary decisions. You sit for a moment and observe people around you. Life continues with a balance of work, rest, and consumption. Sugars is part of all three, quietly woven into transitions between states of activity. You begin to understand something subtle. Sugar is no longer just a substance moving through systems. It is now part of behavioral structure itself. You move through evening city life again. Lights reflect off glass and concrete. People unwind from the day. Food and drink become part of relaxation. Sugar appears here not as necessity, but as comfort. You notice how it functions emotionally. It marks pauses. It softens transitions. It signals relief after effort. Its role is no longer only physical. Cultural studies of consumption suggest that sugar has become closely associated with emotional regulation practices in modern societies, particularly in contexts of stress, reward, and relaxation. You enter a quiet domestic space. A simple moment unfolds. Food is prepared, shared, and consumed without emphasis on complexity. Sugar is present in small ways. Integrated into the background of the meal, you realize how completely it has entered everyday life. It is not exceptional, it is foundational. And yet, even in this normalization, there is still an underlying tension. The same substance that provides comfort and energy is also increasingly analyzed, measured, and discussed. You begin to see sugar as something layered. It is sensory, economic, scientific, and emotional all at once. And in that layered presence, its modern identity becomes clear. It is no longer just something people use, it is something people live with. You move forward again, and the atmosphere shifts into something more introspective, almost reflective. The pace of change slows, but the depth increases. Sugar is no longer only moving through systems of production, science, or daily habit. It is now embedded so deeply in modern life that it begins to disappear from conscious awareness while simultaneously becoming more widespread than ever before. You enter a contemporary world where food is no longer just prepared at home or in local markets. It is designed, engineered, and distributed through global networks of manufacturing and branding. Supermarkets, convenience stores, delivery platforms, and packaged food systems define how most people interact with what they eat. You walk through this environment and begin to notice something subtle. Sugar is everywhere, yet rarely seen directly. It is present in forms that are not immediately recognizable. It appears in ingredient lists, in modified names, in combinations that make it less visible but more functionally integrated. Food system research indicates that modern processed food environments contain sugar in a wide variety of derived forms, allowing manufacturers to adjust sweetness levels while maintaining product stability. Texture and shelf life. You pick up a product in imagination. The packaging is clean, minimal, designed for clarity and appeal. You look at the label, sugar is present, but not always as a single obvious term. It may appear in multiple ingredient components, each contributing subtly to the overall profile. You realize how different this is from earlier eras. In ancient times, sugar was rare and visible. In industrial times, it became standardized and mass-produced. Now, it is dispersed, fragmented, and often hidden within complex formulations. You walk through a supermarket aisle again, but this time your attention is focused on structure rather than products. Rows of foods are organized by category, but beneath those categories, there is a shared underlying pattern. Many items contain similar foundational ingredients, with sugar being one of the most common. Public health research often highlights that the modern food environment has significantly increased exposure to added sugars through processed foods, making it a routine part of dietary intake even when not intentionally selected. You move into a cafe environment. People are working, talking, or resting with drinks and snacks in hand. Sugar is present in many of these items, but it is not the focus of attention. It operates in the background, shaping flavor without being the center of discussion. You begin to notice how normalized it has become in sensory experience. Sweetness is often expected at a baseline level in many modern food categories. When it is absent, it becomes noticeable. Behavioral food studies suggest that repeated exposure to sweetened products can shift taste perception over time, gradually influencing baseline expectations for flavor intensity in everyday diets. You sit and observe the flow of people. Life moves quickly here. Work, communication, travel, consumption. Sugar fits into this rhythm because it is immediate, accessible, and easily integrated into short-time windows. You realize that its role is no longer tied to scarcity or celebration. It is tied to convenience and repetition. You walk through an urban street lined with food outlets and convenience stores. Many products are designed for quick consumption. Sugar is part of this design logic. It enhances taste, extends shelf life, and increases palatability in products meant for fast use. Some nutritional analyses suggest that the rise of ultra-processed foods has significantly increased indirect sugar consumption. as it is incorporated into a wide range of everyday items beyond traditional sweets. You enter a home kitchen, it is modern, compact, and efficient. Ingredients are often pre-prepared or partially processed. Sugar is already present in many of them before cooking begins. This reduces preparation time but also changes the relationship between cooking and ingredient awareness. You notice how little attention is given to its presence. It is assumed, it is embedded. It's part of the structure of modern food systems, rather than an individual decision point. You move into a grocery storage space, and shelves are filled with products designed for long-term use. Sugar plays a role here not only in sweetness, but in preservation, stability, and texture control. Its functional versatility makes it difficult to remove without altering the product itself. Food technology research emphasizes that sugar's chemical properties contribute to moisture retention, fermentation control, and flavor balancing, making it a highly adaptable ingredient in industrial food production. You step outside again and observe the broader urban environment. Advertising, media, and cultural messaging continue to shape perception. Food is presented not just as nourishment, but as experience, reward, and comfort. Sugar is often part of this emotional framing, even when not explicitly mentioned. You notice how deeply it has become associated with moments of pause and satisfaction. After work, during breaks, in social settings. It appears as part of emotional rhythm rather than dietary structure alone. Cultural consumption studies suggest that sugar-rich foods have become closely linked to reward-based eating behaviours in modern societies, particularly in contexts involving stress relief and social relaxation. You walk into an evening setting. People gather in informal spaces, sharing food and drink. Desserts, snacks, and beverages circulate naturally. Sugar is part of the social atmosphere, contributing to shared experience rather than individual focus. You begin to see how it functions socially as well as biologically. It creates moments of shared pleasure, even if briefly and informally. You pause in a quiet space and reflect on how sugar has transformed across time, from rare plant extract to elite luxury, from medicinal additive to industrial commodity, from mass-produced ingredient to invisible component of everyday food systems. Each stage has not replaced the previous one entirely. Instead, layers have accumulated. Some historical interpretations in food studies suggest that sugar's evolution is best understood not as a linear transformation, but as an accumulation of overlapping roles across different eras of human development. You continue walking through the city at night. Lights reflect on surfaces, movement slows, people return to homes, rest, or quiet activity. Sugar continues to be present in small, familiar ways, integrated into final meals, evening drinks, or simple comforts. You notice how it accompanies transitions. It is often part of endings, pauses, and recoveries. It helps mark the shift from activity to rest. You realize that sugar is no longer something you think about as a separate entity. It has become part of structure, behavior, and expectation. And yet, despite this deep integration, it remains shaped by history. Every modern moment of sweetness carries traces of ancient fields, trade routes, industrial machines, and global systems. You begin to understand that sugar is not just a substance that entered human life. It is a substance that reshaped human life in layers, and now, in this present world, those layers are fully present at once, even if rarely seen. You move forward again, and this time the world feels less like a sequence of changes and more like a completed system quietly running in the background of human life. There are no dramatic shifts in landscape anymore, no clear turning points. Instead, everything exists at once ancient origins, colonial expansion, industrial acceleration, and modern consumption, all layered into a single continuous present. You are now fully inside the contemporary global food environment, where sugar is no longer something you encounter, as a distinct material or even a consciously chosen ingredient. It is part of the architecture of daily life itself. It sits inside systems that operate so smoothly that they are rarely questioned. You walk through a modern supermarket, but this time it feels less like a place of choice and more like a map of global coordination. Every shelf represents long chains of production, transportation, processing, and regulation. Sugar is not located in one section, it is distributed across many. Food system analyses show that modern retail environments are structured around ultra-processed supply chains, in which sugar functions as one of the most widely used baseline ingredients. Present in products ranging from beverages and baked goods to sauces, snacks, and packaged meals. You pick up an item in imagination and turn it slowly in your hands. The label is dense with information. Ingredients are listed in technical language, sometimes under alternative names or derived components. Sugar is there, but not always immediately visible as a single recognizable term. You begin to understand how invisibility has become one of its defining features in the present world. It is no longer hidden in the sense of secrecy. It is hidden in the sense of diffusion, spread across many forms and functions. You leave the store and walk into the surrounding city. Life moves quickly here, structured by schedules, notifications, and short time windows between activities. Food is often consumed in fragments of time rather than full meals. Sugar fits naturally into this rhythm because it delivers immediate sensory and energetic response. Behavioral nutrition research suggests that modern consumption patterns often favor rapidly accessible energy sources, with sugar-rich foods becoming common in contexts where time scarcity and cognitive load influence dietary choices. You sit in a public space and observe people moving through their day. Drinks are consumed while walking, snacks are eaten between tasks, meals are often compressed into shorter intervals. Sugar appears frequently in these moments, not as a focus, but as a background support to pace and energy. You notice something subtle here. Sugar no longer needs to announce itself. It operates silently within systems of convenience. You move into a cafe again. Conversations happen around you. Laptops are open, phones are active, drinks are customized, standardized, and quickly prepared. Sugar is part of many of these beverages, but it is not discussed. It is assumed within the experience. Cultural consumption studies indicate that sweetness in modern food systems is often associated with emotional regulation, reward signaling, and social comfort, particularly in high-stress urban environments. You take a moment to reflect on how far this has come, from wild grasses in early landscapes, to cultivated crops in river valleys, to luxury goods in ancient cities, to medicinal additives in apothecaries, to plantation economies, to industrial factories, and now to invisible integration within global processed food systems. Each stage did not erase the previous one. Instead, it layered over it. You begin to see sugar as something cumulative, not linear. It carries all its histories at once, even when those histories are not consciously remembered in daily life. You walk through a residential area in the evening. Homes are lit softly. People prepare meals or unwind after long days. Sugar is present in small, familiar ways, in drinks, desserts, packaged ingredients, and simple comforts that mark the transition from activity to rest. You notice how it continues to accompany emotional shifts. It appears at endings of work, during moments of relaxation, in shared social experiences. It has become part of rhythm rather than exception. Anthropological studies of modern food behavior suggest that sugar-rich foods often function as ritualized comfort elements in daily routines, reinforcing patterns of reward, transition, and social bonding. You sit quietly and observe this rhythm unfolding around you. Nothing about it feels unusual anymore. That is precisely the point. Sugar has become normalized to the degree that it rarely requires attention, and yet, beneath this normality lies an extraordinary history. You begin to see the entire journey at once. Early humans noticing sweetness in wild plants, agricultural societies cultivating cane, early processors discovering crystallization, trade networks carrying sugar across continents, elite societies using it as luxury and medicine, plantation systems scaling production across global territories, industrial factories refining it into standardized form, modern systems embedding it invisibly into nearly every category of processed food. All of it exists simultaneously in the present form of sugar you encounter today. Economic historians emphasize that sugar is one of the clearest examples of how a single agricultural product can evolve into a global structuring force, influencing trade, labor systems, consumption habits, and even emotional culture across centuries. You walk through the quiet night city again. Lights reflect off surfaces. Movement slows. People transition toward rest. Sugar continues to appear in small final moments of the day. A drink, a snack, a dessert, a quiet comfort before sleep. You realize that it has become part of how humans end their days as much as how they begin them. You pause and think about what sugar now represents. It's not just energy, not just taste, not just history. It is structure. It is memory. It is behavior embedded into global systems that shape daily life at every scale. There is ongoing academic discussion around how deeply modern dietary patterns are shaped by long-term commodity histories, with sugar frequently cited as a central example of how global trade and local behavior become inseparable over time. You take a final look at the world around you. It is ordinary now, familiar, comfortable, integrated. Yet beneath that ordinariness is a vast invisible network stretching across centuries and continents. Sugar is everywhere, but rarely seen as itself anymore. It has completed its journey from rare plant sweetness to global constant, and now it simply remains. Woven into the background of human life, shaping moments quietly, continuously, without needing to be noticed. You let that realization settle gently, like something soft fading into silence, and in that silence, the story of sugar becomes part of you too. You stay in this quiet present moment a little longer, as if the world has finally slowed down enough to breathe with you. The city outside is still there, still moving in distant patterns of light and sound, but it feels softer now, less demanding. Almost like it is drifting instead of rushing. Sugar no longer feels like a topic, it feels like an atmosphere, something that has always been around you, shaping choices, shaping habits, shaping small everyday comforts without asking for attention. And now, as everything becomes still, you can almost sense the long path it has travelled just beneath the surface of ordinary life. From wild plants in ancient landscapes to carefully tended fields, from slow trade routes to vast ships crossing oceans, from early kitchens to industrial factories, from hidden ingredients to everyday presence in nearly everything people consume, it has been present in countless forms, always adapting, always blending into whatever world humans were building at the time. But here, at the end of this long journey, none of that feels heavy. It feels distant in the same way old memories do, present but softened, like something you once understood deeply and now simply let rest. You do not need to hold the entire history in your mind anymore. It has already done its work in the background of human life. What remains now is only the quiet awareness that even the simplest things in your daily world have long and complicated stories behind them. And as your breathing slows, even that thought begins to fade gently. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to analyze, just stillness, settling softly around you. Sleep comes easily now, as if it was always waiting beneath the noise. Sweet dreams.